Okay, now that we know what Laserdiscs are and why they never achieved mass market adoption, let's look at some of the technical details of the format as well as how it evolved over time. So first, I haven't yet made the exact distinction between CAV discs and CLV discs. These stand for constant angular velocity and constant linear velocity. Their names explain the difference. A CAV disc rotates at a constant 1800 RPM. Each rotation contains exactly one frame of video. This encoding method was simpler and let the player do some neat things, but it limited recording time to 30 minutes per side. A CLV disc slows the disc's rotational speed as it progresses. See, as the laser moves towards the edge of a disc, the circumference of the disc along the spot it's reading continually increases. Constant linear velocity encoding slows the disc down as the laser progresses to keep the speed of the disc relative to the laser constant, rather than keeping its absolute rotational speed constant. This allowed recording an hour per side of the disc, but it also could increase crosstalk noise, and because the number of encoded frames per revolution was constantly changing, the trick play features of the CAV disc were eliminated. Pioneer would reduce crosstalk by modifying CLV into CAA, which slowed the rotational speed in steps. CAA, standing for constant angular acceleration, was more of a behind-the-scenes alteration though, and these discs were still marked as CLV on their sleeves. Real cinephiles want CAV discs. There are a number of reasons for this, but one of the most interesting is the way the discs are indexed. Play a CLV disc and the display acts like you would expect. You get the chapters available and the time counts up from 0. But a CAV disc, well, just watch. That's right, these are frames. In a CAV disc, each frame is directly accessible by number, and you can simply type in a frame number and the player will nearly instantly get to it. And that freeze frame is perfect. This opened up a lot of interactive possibilities. Of historical note is the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago's use of Laserdiscs to allow guests to view every front page of the Chicago Tribune newspaper. This was back in 1980. There were also arcade games and even home video game systems developed which used Laserdisc as a random access video system. Remember how I said the collector's market saved Laserdisc from dying completely? Well, much of that was due to special editions like this Pocahontas box set. I know there could be better films to explore, but this box set is actually perfect for showing what Laserdisc had to offer. Look at all this extra stuff. The first 3 sides are the film itself in CAV format. The analog soundtrack contains a commentary track on the left channel, though it's mastered very, very poorly for some reason.
The sword on John Smith's back, that was, I think John Pomeroy was the one who led the character in animation.
The right channel contains Dolby Digital sound. More on that briefly. The 4th side is in CLV, as it's an hour-long making-of feature. But the 3rd disc is where it gets really interesting. First of all, look at all these chapters. There are 48 alone in special features. But the Laserdisc was able to tell the player to freeze the frame. This was used extensively in box sets like this to organize collections of still images. I'm not going to show you much of the actual content, because I don't really want to get in trouble with Disney, but I will go through some of the title cards so you can get an idea of how this is navigated. After a brief intro, the disc automatically stops and you see the little leaf with step appear. That's because what follows is a sequence of still frames. If you press play, the player will just resume normal playback and you'll get an Infoblast style mess until it receives the next command to stop. But on the remote, the step button allows you to advance just 1 frame at a time. And since each of these frames has a discrete number, you can get back to it simply by entering the frame number. When there's a segment of actual video, the leaf instead says play, so you know what to do next. You'll see that there are also a lot of commentaries here as well on the analog tracks. Sure, the special features section on a DVD can do all these same things, but it's really something that an analog format from so long ago can do it too. And I'm left to wonder if there's anything on these Laserdiscs that hasn't made its way onto a DVD or Blu-ray release. In fact, there's a lot of content on Laserdisc that hasn't left the realm of Laserdisc. And one more thing before we move on. The search by chapter nature of the Laserdisc made it prime material for the education market. This disc here, well, it's a weird one. A showcase of computer-generated imagery from 1986. I kid you not, this disc is the Vaporwave community's dream. And I know this because when I learned what Vaporwave was, there was a video featuring this Laserdisc's opening clip. Ah, but there's more. There's this.
This time-consuming process creates highly detailed and spectacular images.
And this,
where you're trying to get across a look and a feeling in 10 seconds. You can pick some perfect blue for your object, but you don't know what color it's really going to be until you light it.
and it also features this creepy talking head.
Fulfilling absolute decree in casual simplicity.
I'm fairly sure this was meant as an educational disc, but I'm not certain. Oddly enough, the Voyager company, the producers of the disc, was the publisher of the Criterion Collection, perhaps the most famous collector's edition Laserdiscs. Anyway, having near instant random access to any part of the disc made Laserdisc great for teachers. If there was a particular clip that would easily show a concept, you could cue it right up. This was particularly useful in science classes to show experiments quickly. A VHS tape would require a lot of effort and patience to cue up, but if the lesson on Newton's third law of motion was chapter 14 of a Laserdisc, just type in 14 and you're ready to go. On that note, CLV discs took significantly longer to cue up a new chapter. Because of the disc's enormous size, it takes a while to speed up and slow down. So when searching for a chapter that's well away from the start, the disc needs to slow down a lot to get to the correct speed. The laser doesn't take much time to get from one chapter to the next, but it has to wait for the disc to get to the right speed before it can actually play. Now, I've stepped a little far ahead here, showing discs with digital sound and Dolby Digital. Let's take a step back and look more at the evolution of the format. I had mentioned in my introductory video on Laserdisc that while the format began its life as a product of a joint venture between Philips and the Music Corporation of America called Discovision, the Pioneer Company of Japan would sort of take over the format. They were part of the official renaming of the format to Laservision, and they were the ones that branded their own players as a Laserdisc. From the mid-1980s until the end of its life, Pioneer was almost the only manufacturer of Laserdisc players. There were others, with Sony producing a good show, but it was Pioneer that kept pushing the format and adding new innovations. Perhaps the first major innovation was the use of a solid-state laser. You might have noticed that this machine is massive. It's a lot wider than the VCR we were putting it up against, which itself is big and bulky. And this is by far the largest piece of AV equipment I have ever run across. Much of its width comes from the laser carriage. Initially, Laserdisc players used a helium neon laser tube as its source of laser light. This tube is quite large, and so is the necessary optical path the beam has to make to be focused onto the disc and reflected back to the light sensor. I'll be doing a teardown of this machine in a later video, but let's take a quick peek. This entire carriage moves left and right as it scans the disc. Oddly enough, this tiny little motor is responsible for moving this whole thing. And yes, that black crud is from the completely disintegrated belt that was on here when I got this machine. I have a somewhat suitable replacement on here, but it seems to have trouble reversing the carriage. It advances just fine though. Inside this black plastic shield are a pair of mirrors attached to small wiggly things, and by shifting the angle that the beam hits the glass ever so slightly, you could maintain fine tracking on the disc. See, unless the disc is exactly perfectly centered, which with this fine of a data stream it most certainly won't be, the laser will need to be constantly moving left, right to follow the spiral groove of pits. I strongly suspect that's what's wrong with this player, as it exhibits severe crosstalk when playing a CAV disc. It does appear to be able to maintain focus distance, as the objective lens can move and it produces a picture, but without fine tracking control, the output will be a mess. I don't want to get started on this project quite yet though. That'll have to wait. In either 1983 or 1984, it seems there's some date disagreement, Pioneer introduced the LD700 player, which incorporated a solid-state laser. This was also the first player to introduce a tray loading system. By switching to a solid-state laser, the machines could be much smaller, as the laser assembly was a small fraction of its previous size. But there was a small compromise made. The helium neon laser produced a red-orange light, but the laser diodes used in Laserdisc players shared the same infrared light of the compact disc audio format. The longer wavelength of the infrared light couldn't be focused quite as tightly as the shorter wavelength red-orange light. This meant a player with a solid-state laser would be more susceptible to crosstalk, and scratches or other damage to the disc would affect its ability to read the pits to a greater degree. However, the many advantages of a solid-state laser pickup system greatly outweighed this single disadvantage, and thus infrared became the way to go. By 1984, it was clear that Laserdisc would stay in the realm of the video file, as the video cassette recorder seemed perfectly fine for the masses. With that in mind, Pioneer started adding new features to their players and updated the format along the way. The first main addition was that of digital sound. Ha, you thought FM stereo wasn't enough? How about uncompressed 16-bit stereo PCM audio? When introducing a player with digital sound capabilities, Pioneer killed two birds with one stone by also letting it play the newly introduced compact disc. The digital audio on a Laserdisc is encoded much the same as a CD, so Pioneer already had the circuitry on board to process the digital audio from a CD. Thus, the CLD-900 could play both. Weirdly though, this player contained an odd mechanism with two separate spindles, with one for holding a CD and the other a Laserdisc. Looking on the Laserdisc archive, it seems many early players were designed this way. I'm guessing this was due to difficulty in designing and controlling one spindle motor capable of spinning both the massive Laserdisc and the tiny CD correctly. Eventually though, a single spindle with a collapsible center was used for both CDs and Laserdiscs. Because Laserdiscs held two separate audio tracks and NTSC discs, one of these could be replaced with the digital soundtrack, while the other could remain as an analog conventional soundtrack. A signal on the disc would indicate to the player that the disc contained digital sound, and it would switch to the secondary soundtrack containing the data. The analog soundtrack stayed on the primary channel, and older players would just ignore the signal to switch to the secondary track. But the addition of digital audio caused some compatibility issues. For one, PAL discs didn't have two separate audio tracks. Not sure why, but they didn't. This meant that a PAL Laserdisc was either digital or analog, and an analog-only player could not play a disc with digital sound. This probably didn't help the already poor sales in Europe. At first, Pioneer had to sacrifice playing time to fit digital audio on the discs. The first digital audio discs only held 55 minutes per side, which left some titles, like this copy of Back to the Future, released as analog only, even though digital sound was available at the time of its release. Because this film is 1 hour and 56 minutes, it would fit on a single disc with analog sound, but would need a second disc for digital sound. So they stuck with analog to keep it on a single disc.
This is truly amazing. A portable television studio.
By 1987, Pioneer had figured out how to get an hour runtime and still have digital sound. Hey look, MCA! Then we get to surround sound. Laserdisc was pretty much the only way to get true surround sound until DVD came along, but the way surround was encoded was, to put it kindly, messy. If a disc contained a Dolby AC3 soundtrack, the AC3 data was FM modulated on the right channel of the analog track, and required the use of a receiver capable of demodulating this into a digital output. Modern receivers don't have this functionality, so to get the Dolby AC3 soundtrack off a Laserdisc requires an external AC3 demodulator. But because a Dolby AC3 encoded disc uses one channel of the analog track and leaves standard stereo digital sound in place, these discs can only be played in mono on an analog-only Laserdisc player. Not that many of those stuck around for very long, as once digital sound was introduced, nearly every player manufactured could utilize it. Then there's DTS audio. A DTS encoded disc uses the digital tracks, so to play it on a normal player required switching back to the analog tracks. As an example, this copy of Casper has a DTS soundtrack, because if there's any movie that needs DTS surround, it's Casper. When you play it, the player doesn't know it shouldn't be reading the digital track, and it's producing a garbage output. You need to manually switch back to the analog soundtrack if you want to hear the movie. So, if you wanted digital surround sound, you need to match your player to a compatible receiver and then also make sure you're buying the right discs. There certainly are people who are that dedicated, but not many. Okay, so aside from format technicalities, let's look at some of the more clever things Pioneer did. My personal favorite is what they dubbed both-side play. Just as auto-reverse cassette recorders came on the scene to save you the trouble of flipping the tape, Pioneer also developed Laserdisc players that can play both sides of the disc. And the way they go about it is just so awesome. Seriously, both-side play is my favorite example of forced engineering. I'll explain what I mean there, but first, let's have a look at a machine with this feature. This is a Pioneer CLD D502. Their model naming scheme, by the way, helps explain what the machine can do. It wasn't entirely consistent over the years, but in general, the C in CLD means it can also play audio CDs and CD video discs. Not video CDs, though. The D means it can play both sides, and the 502 is the model number, with higher numbers generally having more features. For example, the CLD D702 added extra AV outports, featured an altered VFD display, and had better video performance. A model like the CLD S201 could only play a single side. There were also the CLD-M models, which featured a 5-disc CD changer alongside normal Laserdisc operation. This channel used to have a video featuring one of those machines, however I've taken it down temporarily because I want to redo that video properly and not in the very rambly style of the first incarnation. Stay tuned for its replacement. Anyway, you might know what's involved in playing the second side, but for those who don't, see if you can guess. I'll start the disc on side A. Okay, so it spun the disc up and is now playing, but listen to what happens when I switch to side B. You probably noticed it stopping the disc, then the motor that moves the tray in and out did some moving about, and there was a third sound you haven't heard yet, along with the disc spinning back up. Obviously a good deal of stuff just happened, so let's look inside. In addition to usually being a little bit taller than a single-sided Laserdisc player, both side play models generally have this protrusion out the back. This houses the laser turn mechanism. That's right, in these machines the entire laser assembly is moved to the top side of the disc. This is some pretty crazy engineering in a number of ways. So let's see it in action. The laser assembly normally sits here and rides along the bottom rails. But when it needs to read side B, it travels all the way to the rear of the machine where it enters a sort of Ferris wheel-like contraption. This lifts the laser to the top as well as flips it upside down, and then the laser moves forward and engages with a second set of rails on the top. The disc stops to reverse direction, as it would otherwise be spinning the wrong way. Let's look at that in slow motion, because why not? This is no simple feat, as the laser needs to derail itself from the bottom and reattach to the top. It also requires a relatively complex and delicate ribbon cable situation to actually send power and retrieve signals from the laser head assembly. But the fact that this was necessary hints to yet another reason Laserdisc didn't achieve mass market success. See, if someone were interested today in making a CD or DVD player that could read both sides of a disc, which admittedly isn't really ever necessary, almost certainly the cheapest and simplest way to do it would be to place a second laser assembly on the top and simply change which one was being used. In fact, there were a number of stylized CD changers available that simply had multiple CD player mechanisms stacked in a tower. Obviously, it was pretty cheap to make a CD player assembly, but clearly there was something about the laser assembly of a Laserdisc player that made it much more expensive. And I'm not talking about the rails or the motor that moves it, I mean this guy itself. If it were easy to make, why not just use two of them? Why bother with engineering and manufacturing this elaborate mechanism? I suspect that the analog nature of the Laserdisc meant tighter tolerances and higher quality components were required here. See, with a digital format, the clarity of the signal coming from the laser is pretty much irrelevant. So long as a pit can be distinguished from a land, the output would be the same. In other words, a fuzzy and hard to decipher 10011100 means the same thing to a digital to analog converter as a strong and clear 10011100. In other words, the signal-to-noise ratio is irrelevant in a digital format. Either the signal is there or it isn't. Signal-to-noise ratio can get really bad before the data is not recoverable. But since Laserdisc was an analog format, the signal-to-noise ratio did matter. If the pits become harder to distinguish from the lands, then the picture it produces gets less clear as well. I suspect that the laser assemblies of compact disc players could be made much more cheaply than Laserdisc players due to this fundamental advantage of a digital format. If you look at the list price of a basic CD player made around the same time as this Laserdisc player, you'll see that they could be had for about $100. This Laserdisc player is listed at $459, and the CLD S201, a single-side machine, is listed at $319. Now, if manufacturers could turn a profit on a CD player at just over $100, that laser pickup probably didn't cost more than $30 or so to make. Of course, a Laserdisc player has much more circuitry and a larger spindle motor than a CD player, but the way the data is read from the disc is the same. I'm sure if Pioneer could have figured out how to make an acceptable analog laser pickup for $30, this mechanism would have been ditched for a second laser permanently attached to these upper rails. But that clearly wasn't possible, as Pioneer was forced to keep using similar laser transfer mechanisms until the end of Laserdisc. Digital formats were also helped by the implementation of error correction. A CD player can detect errors and correct them through cross-interleaved Reid-Solomon coding, and it can also use interpolation to mask a very large error. In fact, I have a copy of Lincoln by They Might Be Giants, which has a bunch of small holes in the aluminum layer. You can hold it to a light and see right through them. But it still plays fine, as even with chunks of missing data, the CD player's robust error correction allows it to make it through. A Laserdisc enjoys this sort of redundancy in its digital soundtrack, but the video has no such error correction. A large enough scratch on the disc will be visible, sometimes as a simple black speck. In a CAV disc, the speck would briefly stay on the screen in the same place, but in a CLV disc it would dart around the screen. And then there's laser rot. Ah yes, laser rot. Someone in the comments noted that it's called disc rot, as it has nothing to do with the laser, which is technically correct, but laser rot is the term used when specifically talking about disc rot occurring on laserdiscs. The original DiscoVision manufacturing plants made their discs very sloppily. It wasn't uncommon for the aluminum reflective layer to start to oxidize and lose its reflectivity, likely due to poor adhesive which didn't seal the discs correctly. You can forgive them a little though, as they were literally writing the book on how to make an optical disc. Oxidation of the aluminum layer would cause a disc to exhibit more and more visual artifacts and eventually become unplayable. This copy of Star Trek: The Motion Picture from 1980 exhibits severe laser rot. You can see that this disc is completely gone just by looking at it. It should not look like that. But its companion, while not showing physical signs of rot, doesn't play well at all. Take a look.
Intruder unidentified. Believe luminescent cloud to be enormous power field surrounding alien vessel.
Photon torpedo load status.
Transporter system fully repaired.
Aside from the frequent signal dropouts, the player isn't able to maintain tracking and sometimes gets locked reading the same spot.
You haven't logged a single star hour in 2.5 years. That plus your unfamiliar...
Most discs don't rot so badly that you can simply tell at a glance. This disc is a true disaster. Laser rot wasn't that common, possibly affecting as few as 1% of discs according to the Laserdisc database. Of course that exists, but certain factories were notorious for producing discs that are rotting today. The DADC plant in Terre Haute, Indiana seems to have been the worst offender, with 1,490 titles from this factory known to have rot, including this disc of Fargo, the 21st most commonly reported disc with rot.
Okay, yeah. Think I'll take a drive down there then.
Oh yeah? Twin Cities.
Oh yeah?
No, Wade, they were real clear. They said they'd call tomorrow with instructions and it's gotta be delivered by me alone.
It's my money, I'll deliver it.
Wow, this video got long quickly. We're almost done with this saga on Laserdisc, and I'll leave you with this machine. This is a Pioneer DVL 700. The D at the beginning means it can also play DVDs. This is a very early DVD player from 1997. As we know, DVD was a huge success and they continued to sell in large numbers. Already DVD is as old as Laserdisc was when it died, but DVD shows no signs of dying quite yet. In the next video, we'll look at some of Laserdisc's features that we didn't get in the States, and we'll also see why DVD was able to succeed where Laserdisc failed. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If this is your first time watching this channel and you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing. This channel is made possible by supporters on Patreon. Patrons of the channel are what keeps these videos coming. In fact, with the support of viewers like you, I now spend more time on this channel than I do at work. If you're interested in helping out as well, please check out my Patreon page through the link on your screen or down below in the description. Thanks for your consideration, and I'll see you next time.
With the advent of three-dimensional computer animation, different looks and styles have evolved.